3, 2, 1.
You have come here from all over the world because society has no further use for you. The international prison system has given up all hopes of your rehabilitation. This place will now be your holding pen until your death. Because death is the only way out. There is no chance of reprieve here, no possibility of escape. You are condemned. Either accept it or die.
Okay, let's go. Let's go.
Hello and welcome. Welcome and hello. This is Wait, You Haven't Seen? It's a show where we talk about movies, and specifically, we talk about a movie at least one of us has never seen before. I'm your host, Travis, a.k.a. TV's Travis. This is episode number 206, and our movie this week is from 1994, starring Ray Liotta, called No Escape. And here to talk with me about it, he had seen it and made me watch it. From the Part-Time Gamers, it's Theo. Theo, how are you?
Hey, good to be here. Good to see you. How are you?
I am doing quite well. Okay, so you brought this movie to me. I want to know your history with No Escape. When did you first see it? Because I was familiar with the... I'll get into kind of my history, but I was familiar with the movie, but I had not seen it before. So what's your history with it?
So I won't give a number, but to date myself, I actually saw this in the movie theater.
Okay.
And this was one of those movies that I grew up in a very small town in Hawaii. And that was probably one of the best things for me because it really opened my eyes up to cinema and things like that. So this was one of those movies. I was a huge fan even back then of Goodfellas. And of course, Ray Liotta being a part of that. And this was something I had seen, like HBO, like first looked for to kind of date. They used to have that. Mm-hmm. And I actually seen it in the theater. And I saw it in the theater about 3 times. And this was one of those movies where stuck with me for so long because it was like there's so and I'm so looking forward to your take. But you talk about a movie that really has its own niche points. Like there's some bizarre things in this movie where you're just like, oh, we did that in the 90s and we thought that looked cool and we thought that looked edgy. And it's just something I really enjoyed for so long. I'm so glad now it's on streaming. For a while, there was some issues with the rights. Mm-hmm. And it was a few months ago, just before we had started talking about doing an episode as well as this movie. I remember talking to my girlfriend, and I was like, there's this movie, and it's kind of niche. It's fun. It's very 90s, but it's still pretty cool in its own way. And one of the biggest things is you can't find it on streaming. And about a month later, it ended up on Amazon Prime, and it was like $7 I ever spent.
Absolutely. Okay, so I don't remember this movie coming out necessarily, although I'm almost positive I saw trailers for it on like the cable channel there was the guide channel back in the day. You would have a specific channel on cable that just ran a TV guide. And it would have like the time and what was upcoming, and then in the corner it would be just playing trailers and promos over and over and over. So I'm almost positive I saw something akin to that type of channel in No Escape. I'm sure I saw the box here and there when I'd go to the video store, but I didn't see it. I was just a little bit too young to see it in the theater. Now the next year, the director made GoldenEye, and I saw that in the theater.
You sure did.
But that's PG-13, so that's a little easier for me to get into when I'm 14, as opposed to an R-rated movie like this one. But so I sort of like knew that the movie existed, but it occupied the same space in my brain as something like Surviving the Game. It was that kind of a movie. And it is similar. This has a lot of similarities to Surviving the Game, to Fortress from the early 90s with Christopher Lambert.
Great reference.
Escape from New York / Escape from LA. And so it's similar to those kinds of movies, but it's not an exact rip-off. I wouldn't call it that. So what I'm going to say is I sat down, I watched this. We were actually originally going to do this episode a couple of weeks ago, and we got our wires crossed
Don't
And
calendar well sometimes. I apologize.
it happens. It was like, not a worry. We punt for a couple of weeks. We're good. So I watched it a couple of weeks ago for the first time, and I had a great time with this movie. This was, I went into it because I didn't really know much about it, I went into it with fairly low expectations in terms of just like, I'm just going to sit back, I'm going to watch this movie and see what it is. What does it give me? I knew Ray Liotta, and I might have seen one Ernie Hudson on the poster for it, and that was about all I knew. I love Ray Liotta. Sadly passed away last year. Funny thing is, he passed away in 2022. This movie is set in 2022, the future.
It is, yeah. Yes, their take on the future is very 90s.
They did. It's the one. So I can nitpick quite a bit on this movie because it's a cheesy 90s action movie. So if you want to throw on your logic hat and start nitpicking, one thing is, with movies like this, set them further in the future. That helps, because then it's like Blade Runner being set in 2015, I think it was. Then you get to that's not far enough in the future ahead. I can let some of that go, because I can just be like, well, alternate reality, right? This is what the future, the where the timeline branched off for this movie's existence. That's what 2022 looked like. But I like Ray Liotta a lot, and he was not at this time especially any kind of an action star. He had done Goodfellas, is the one you brought up, which is fantastic. He's so good in that. He had done Field of Dreams, but he wasn't an action guy yet. He wasn't, Schwarzenegger or Stallone or Van Damme, who Van Damme was actually offered the role. He was offered the role.
Completely different movie.
In a very different movie. He was offered the role, turned it down because he was going to make Time Cop, which I honestly, for him, that's kind of a coin flip. Like, Time Cop is another one of these silly, fun action movies from the 90s. So I could see Van Damme in this. However, what I liked about what Liotta brought to it was, and I had it in my notes, like at one point I'm like, I think I was probably 2/3 of the movie in, and I'm like, I still don't understand why he hates everyone and why he's distancing himself so hard from everybody. But I bought into it because Liotta's got this like intensity to him.
Yes.
That he's got an intensity without you're waiting for that moment where he's going to explode and he's just going to have the freak out, yelling, whatever type of moment. But it feels like he's always sitting right on the razor's edge of that. Like, Liotta was just really good at that.
Absolutely.
And on top of that, he got in some good shape for this movie, because there's a couple scenes where he's got his shirt off, and I was like, "Ooh, boy!" He like trimmed down, and he looked like a Marine, and he's supposed to be.
He looked very much like a soldier.
Yeah, yep. He's playing a character of J.T. Robbins, who was a soldier, killed his commanding officer, and has now been in prison for I think in the timeline of the movie, he's been in prison for roughly 11 years at this point. Broken out of 2 level 5 maximum security prisons, so they send him to the level 6, which is even worse. And then that has a level above it, which is throw him on an island. So we'll kind of we'll sort of discuss the plot a little bit, because I do think it's kind of neat. But like, Liotta just I feel like really nailed this and made it enjoyable once you get, like, during the first watch through, because I watched it again earlier today to just kind of refresh my brain. And that first watch through, I'm like, why does he hate everybody so much? Why is he just so angry? And as it goes and you start to unfold and you realize, oh, he's suffering from PTSD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, that's an extra layer to this that an actor the caliber of Ray Liotta brings, and it made it that much better. And then you start adding on all these other, I mean, it's got a great cast, just top to bottom.
Supporting cast is phenomenal, and it's so many of them in either their prime or their youth. And like, one of the best ones is, I had it on, and my girlfriend is a huge Entourage fan, and she walks by and she goes, "Is that drama?" Because Kevin Dillon is, and she was like, "Is that drama from Entourage?" I said, "In his youth, yes, that's little drama."
Yeah. Yep, Kevin Dillon playing. He's very young, and he's just as Casey is his character, and he just idolizes Robbins for whatever reason. He latches onto him right away. One thing the movie doesn't do great, and it's not really its fault. It's just sort of the way the movie's structured. You don't really get a sense of how much time is passing. You know, he goes to the prison. So Robbins is sent to this maximum security prison where he immediately butts heads with the warden, who's played by Michael Lerner, and I love Michael Lerner.
Absolutely.
He butts heads with him right away, enough to the point where this warden has a secret island that he sends people to. They call it the prisoners call it Absalom. He will send the worst prisoners there, and that they're just left on this island. There's gunships all around it, like 25 miles off the coast. The island is in the middle, like 250 miles from the mainland, and they're just there. They have some supplies, but they basically just have to exist on this island. It becomes their new prison. So he sends Robbins to the prison, and they watch it with satellites. But as the movie goes on, you find out that it's kind of a little shady and like off the books, because he doesn't want people to know about it. Obviously, if people knew that he was just sending prisoners to an island to cannibalize each other, they might not like that. The general public might have a problem with that, because prisons are effectively a big business. That was one thing that my thought was like, ooh, this was kind of prophetic in that way, because prisons have become much more of a business in the last 25 years since this movie came out.
Yeah, that was something that I thought I didn't realize when I first saw it, because I was a teenager, and I didn't necessarily connect the dots for me. And then I watched it, like I said, recently. And one thing I have to say, when they go back to the prison, for those who watch it, now watching it being at my age, every time they cut to it, first of all, where are they? Because it's like all these bad sands, and then there's like these trams, and then it's like this huge fortress. And every time I see it, I think of like the Super Friends from the 70s. I'm like, meanwhile, at the Legion of Doom.
It did have a little bit of that feel, didn't it?
It did.
Now, this is based on a novel called The Penal Colony, loosely based on a novel. And in that, it's the British government that has the island. But they turn it into a private prison, and this warden that runs it. And I want to say it's supposed to be maybe Australia.
Yes, and I find it interesting because it would make sense that the British would go that route, because that's what Australia was originally. And you know, it's kind of one of those things where there's almost, not having read the book, but when you kind of look at it that way, there's a little bit of,
Yeah.
See what we did? See what we did?
Yeah. And I appreciated that. So the movie itself, we mentioned Kevin Dillon. I liked Kevin Dillon. He was okay. I could think of a few other actors around his age that I might have liked better in that role, but I think that's more of just, I wasn't one that watched Entourage, so I don't have a huge connection to him. So all I think of when I see Kevin Dillon, what my brain does is say, hey, it's Matt Dillon's brother. That's what I do.
Yeah. No matter what he's in, like, you can't help but to go, yep.
Yeah. However, he's fine. He plays the role that he's playing, which is, you know, the young kid who everybody kind of understands really doesn't belong there. He's the prisoner who was a victim of circumstance. He made mistakes, but he shouldn't be in this type of a prison. Kind of thing. And that's how it unfolds. He's fine. Now, Merrick, who's our villain in the movie, our other villain, because we've got the warden, played by Michael Lerner, who is the overall villain and kind of gets his comeuppance at the end, we'll talk about.
Yes.
But our villain on the island, Merrick, is played by Stuart Wilson. And Stuart Wilson is fantastic as a villain. He is so good.
Absolutely.
And in this movie, he is having a blast.
Absolutely.
It is.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's the part of the movie that, because we mentioned like Escape from New York and Fortress, and there's a little Mad Max in there too, with the kind of post-apocalyptic feel. And Stuart Wilson, Merrick runs The Outsiders, which are just this cannibalistic group of nutballs that run around the island. And he's got long dreadlocks, piercings in the bridge of his nose. He's just over the top as all hell, and it's so great.
Absolutely. It's
mean-
one of those roles where you lean in hard, and as far as casting, you don't necessarily see that coming. And I remember seeing this, and this performance still clicks the way it did the first time, because he looks like one of the dreadnoughts from the G.I. Joe cartoons. And as soon as he starts talking, he sounds like an Oxford scholar. And it's hilarious because even the way he carries himself, I mean, you look at this guy and you don't want to mess with him. Then he starts talking, and then you have another moment of, is he supposed to sound like that?
Yeah.
And even more so, it kind of adds to this oddity and this threat. Like, this is a guy you wouldn't want to meet in a dark alley. And what's so great is through so much of it, he has kind of this wryness, but there's just so much energy behind it.
Mm-hmm.
There's very few scenes where he's all, "Rah!" A lot of it is very calculated, very smart, and with like this kind of sly cunning to it. He's great. For me, he in many ways, I mean, Leota's of course fantastic, but I could watch his performance alone just over and over again.
Well, because Leota is playing the role, he's taking it very seriously. And I mean, I think he smiles like 4 times in the entirety of the movie. He just has this dour look the whole movie. He just looks like somebody peed in his Cheerios all the time. And he's, you know, it's the PTSD, but he's playing it so dour and so straightforward that to flip that and let Stuart Wilson just go full on Woody Woodpecker cartoon character, like just zany as all hell, is the perfect balance point to it. Because, and it's kind of a thing you only can get in a movie like this, and sometimes only in a movie from this era. Like, just that you're not going to get this kind of a villain is not going to work in most movies, but because the subject matter and the placement and everything is so just out there, like, you sort of can take that. There's another movie that was, it's not the same type of story as this, but it was called Doomsday. Came out in 2000, I want to say 9 or 8, something like that.
2008 or 2009.
Yeah, with Rona Mitra. And it's got the same type of thing where you've got like these just crazy over-the-top villains, because you need that. It's sort of to balance out the violence and the silliness of just the entirety of the story being told. Let your villain just be completely kooky. And boy, Stuart Wilson jumps all over that. And I love him. I loved him in Hot Fuzz as Dr. Robin Hatcher.
Yes.
He's great in that. Mask of Zorro.
Thank you, Denny.
Yeah. I mean, look, Hot Fuzz, one of my 5 favorite films of all time is Hot Fuzz.
Absolutely.
And,
It's, yes.
You know, and to have Stuart Wilson in that, and I mean he's been doing stuff forever. He's worked with Martin Campbell quite a few times, and
he would have made a great Bond villain, and Martin Campbell made 2 Bond movies. It's like, wait, you were supposed to do that. Why didn't you do that?
Yeah, I know. I don't understand. But like you said, he's calculating the whole time, and that's what I loved about it, is he's always got this wryness to him, and it's like silliness. I could see some people being like, all right, it's just too silly. It's too goofy. But I loved that about it. I loved the silly, like over the top fake laughter. And like you said, it's the visual of what Stuart Wilson is doing with the dreadlocks, with the piercings, with the Mad Max kind of costumes. And then he opens up his mouth and your brain has to stop for a second and kind of reconcile.
Yes.
Wait a minute. He's very like articulate, well-spoken, very smooth. But he looks like he's got a rat's nest growing out of his head and he's wearing, 4-inch spike gloves. Like, it's just the weirdest thing.
Yes.
And you're right. It does make him feel, it's sort of the idea. There was a comedian years and years ago who had a joke where he was talking about guys you wouldn't want to fight. He said, who would you be more scared to fight, Mike Tyson or Tom Arnold? And he's like, I would be much more scared to fight Tom Arnold, because Mike Tyson is scary. Mike Tyson can hit you hard. Mike Tyson's going to beat the hell out of you. But you know what he's going to do. This was prior to Mike Tyson going crazy and biting people's ears off. But he's like, he's trained. You don't know what Tom Arnold's going to do. He's coming at you like a spider monkey, and it's creepy.
It's
and
a
that's
pinata, and it's going to open up. And I've actually met Tom Arnold, so I can honestly say there's like about a good $20 I'd put on him first. And he was great. I met him at a FanX here, and he was wonderful. But there is a little bit of that. You know, some people have, I was in the military, and some people just have this gaze. It's almost like the 1,000-yard stare where you're like,
oh no.
oh, you think about things that would make so many of us just cry. I'm just going to shake your hand and smile and leave.
But and that's the energy that Merrick gives you, because he will do something crazy, like in the movie where he dumps out. He's walks up to all of the outsiders. He's got this bag over his shoulder, and he dumps it out, and it's the heads of all of the other gang leaders. And then he's like, I've been under a lot of stress lately, and really what it comes down to is I just want to be in charge. And it's like, I'm not messing with that guy. Like, fine, be in charge. You want it that bad? Okay. So yeah, he's worth watching this movie for himself.
He's wonderful. And it's I think one of the best things for me is in basically his opening scene, and it's one of those moments where he pits Ray Liotta's character against one of his fighters. And when it ends, he goes, extraordinary. Not exactly what I had in mind, but extraordinary.
Yeah. I love that reaction. And that scene was great because that's your Indiana Jones scene, right? It's the big guy with the sword, and Indy pulls out the gun and shoots him. It's that moment with this huge dude, and Robbins just hucks the spear right into his throat and kills the guy instantly, and just everybody stops.
And they go silent, like the whole scene, and even the theater goes.
Yeah, you're not expecting it at all.
They laugh.
And what's great about a scene like that is when it's used right. Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark did it. This movie did it. You see it. It's a trope. It's totally a tropey scene. But if you don't tip your hand to it, it works. And they didn't tip their hand to this. The way it was all set up, it's such a good execution of that trope. And I loved it.
You really don't see it coming, and it's one of those things that's, like you said, it's become a trope. And there's a trope in here that, and we'll get to that a little bit, but there's one weapon, technological weapon, on the island, and it's basically a mini missile.
Mm-hmm.
And they point it at everybody, and I'm like, that's not how any of that works. And we see that in a lot of movies where they'll be carrying an RPG and they'll point it at somebody in like a closed corridor. I'm like, that won't work. This is not Operation Wolf. That won't work.
No, and you don't want to be that close. You don't want to fire that thing off from 10 feet away. No.
They pointed at everybody, and it's like here, and it's like, okay, is that a real threat? Or are you just trying to make them think you're crazy?
But yeah, Stuart Wilson, totally worth it. Lance Henriksen as the father. I mean, this movie is full of those actors, those character actors you just love and stuff. Lance Henriksen is always good in everything he does. It doesn't matter if he's doing a great film or if he's doing some crap that he just did for a paycheck. He's always. And I did read where, because Martin Campbell. I don't know why all of a sudden I couldn't think of Campbell. Martin Campbell is known for having a bit of a short fuse on set, and apparently Lance Henriksen didn't like that at first, and they didn't get along. But supposedly by the end of filming, they kind of mended the fences enough that they could laugh about it. But it was like early on, it didn't work so well. And Lance Henriksen is not somebody I would want angry with me.
No, and he kind of reminds me of Liotta in a sense of having this intense look. Must be the blue eyes. But he has this intense look. He's kind of like, he could stand still. Heck, Ray Liotta and, Lance Henriksen, they just have this type of aura about them. They could be playing with Play-Doh, and they could be having a good time. And there's nothing out here. It'd be like a poker face. And then in your mind, you're like, he's thinking of hurting me like a lot. There's just this intensity. There's just something about them they exude. And even if they're as nice as can be, it's like, I don't want to shake your hand, And I think that's what's great about those type of actors, especially in the 90s, where you had, this was just at the tail end of 80s action heroes. Mm-hmm. We had not really gotten away from, I wouldn't say they got away, but they were kind of moving out a little bit. this was 94. 95, we had Eraser, which was kind of Arnie's last big action shebang. And then 95, we also had Daylight, which was also one of Stallone's last, before he started kind of having this resurgence with the Expendables.
Yeah.
That was kind of one of his big action shebangs. And that was like a $95 million picture. Eraser was like 120 million. So you started seeing this kind of trailing off of those types as far as, these kind of larger than life figures. They were supposed to be playing like regular people. The only one I ever bought into 100% was Bruce Willis, of course, as in Die Hard. Like,
Right.
he was John McClane, and it was just perfect. And this is kind of around the time we started seeing more actors, not necessarily, these 80s types that we had been used to for about a decade. We started seeing actors kind of getting back or getting into movie roles. Ray Liotta, I think he's perfect for the casting. He, as a casting director, he probably would have been a little low on my call sheet, but I mean, he's fantastic here. And it was kind of nice to see him. And I'm trying to think of a few others off the top of my head, but there were so many actors that started kind of started going a little more thinking man's, not to take away from, my 80s action heroes who I grew up with, but you started getting more actors in these type of roles that you just didn't see normally cast at that point.
Yeah, we were moving away from, and McClane, Bruce Willis's McClane was kind of the first one, but we were moving away from the sort of superhuman superhero character in a film that Arnold would play or Stallone would play or Seagal would be in his early movies, and we were transitioning into kind of more of an everyman action star. They were still action stars, but you were seeing they were doing action movies, but you were seeing the Ray Liotta's, Bruce Willis. You might see somebody. I mean, Jackie Chan was becoming known in the U.S. and his style was so different from those other types of movies. So it was interesting, and I did enjoy that. And Lance Henriksen, to kind of come back to what you were saying about him with that intensity that he has. There are certain actors that are really good yellers and screamers. Your Sam Jacksons and Gene Hackmans, who bring that intensity and can yell really well, and that's their intensity. Lance Henriksen and Ray Liotta are the type that don't have to yell to be intense, and you're just like, I'm sorry I've disappointed you, and I have failed you, sir. Like,
yes, I'm just going to move over here. Don't look at me.
Yeah, like they get quiet and you get scared. And like Henriksen plus he's got like his face, he's just got a very weathered face. And
he's always looked old.
He has. He has always looked like he was in his mid-40s and older. It didn't matter how old he was. He was 25 years old. He looked like he was 47, and he just keeps getting older and more like leather-like. And it's impressive. But he's such a good presence. And the other thing too, and what I like in a movie like this is to keep me guessing as to who's on what side kind of thing. He is the father. He's the leader of the Insiders, this sort of almost hippie-like group of convicts who all get along. And it's funny because this movie also has the trope of like, these people are all in prison, but we don't really get a backstory about any of them, what they did to end up in the worst possible prison. We know Liotta's story, and we learn the father's story, that he was a doctor whose wife cheated on him and then ended up dead. And, he claimed that it was suicide, but he was convicted of her murder and ends up in prison. Whatever he did in the maximum security prison to then get sent to Absalom, but he's there. But at the same time, like, you're always with Lance Henriksen, it could go either way. He could suddenly flip and, be a bad guy as well. So you're just never 100% sure. And I like that every once in a while with a character, and Henriksen just does that really well. I mentioned Ernie Hudson as Hawkins, the chief of security. Ernie Hudson, always great.
Always great.
The trivia was that he took this role because he wanted to get as far away from civilization as he could after making The Crow and kind of everything that happened with making that. And I guess he took his family with him to Australia when they were shooting, and it was supposed to be the dry season, and it rained almost every day. And so they just had to deal with being on a mud bog for the however long he was there. But Ernie Hudson is just fantastic always. He almost always plays some, especially at this time, some variation of kind of the same character. Like, and that's not a bad thing. He's very good at that. But he has this sort of feel about him, like he's the uncle that's always pulling for you, that's always like rooting for you.
Right.
And
he's always had that great presence.
Mm-hmm. And so I liked him there. Plus, when you have somebody who's your head of security, they should be physically imposing, and that's a thing that you like. When you think of physically imposing actors, Ernie Hudson's name doesn't come to mind, but then you see him on screen, it's like, no, he can handle himself. Like, I wouldn't want to.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wouldn't step up to him. So like, he was super fun, and then you start getting into some of these even smaller side characters. Ian McNeice as King. I love Ian McNeice. He's
fantastic.
He's a fantastic stage actor. He's a fantastic screen actor. I've loved him in everything. He was Baron Harkonnen in the Sci-Fi Channel Dune series back in 2000
with William Hurt.
Yep, I loved him in that. He would show up in like Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls, so he can do comedy. And then he was in. Do you remember the movie with Michael Keaton, White Noise, from 2004? He was in that.
The one where they were tracking the ghosts.
Yes.
Okay, I remember that one.
He was in that. Like, he's great, and he's usually doing these kind of character roles. And in this, his role is kind of cool because he's the quirky one that like is always concerned about germs. And so that's his quirk, that's his thing. Because a movie like this where it's set on an island, or it's set, these kind of post-apocalyptic style things, there's always the quirky characters that you deal with throughout the movie, and he's that one. Everything's got to be clean, and he's dealing. And then, of course, you find out later on, kind of, he's not above board. And he's a perfect one to do that with, because when you see him for the first time on screen, you will in no way think that he could be a double agent.
It was a great twist, even back then, where, and movies like this, we talk about tropes, and we kind of like some of them. We also know that, scripts are, 1, 2, 3 acts in most cases.
Yeah.
So, something's kind of reeking in Denmark here, because especially with some of the stuff they do as far as testing like escape craft. But I can honestly say, even back then, like, it was quite a turn, like, him?
Yeah.
You have a bit of a moment where you're like kind of slapped around, like, oh, him. Yeah, and it's played really well, and it's not even played straight. Like, it's just done well enough to he's there, he's the guy, and then it all kind of clicks, and you're like, okay.
For exactly the same reasons that Lance Henriksen, you're always like, maybe he could be the bad guy too. We're not sure. The opposite is true of Ian McNeice. He just always seems very jovial, and he plays like, with the exception of being Baron Harkonnen, but like when he's playing a character that's supposed to be likable and affable, you believe him completely. And so, but you're right, the way they structured it, he was always around. And so then when it's revealed, you can think back like, oh yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. He was always kind of nearby. He knew what was going on enough. So yeah, I liked him. He
was
there.
Somewhere in the midst of it, but he wasn't like engaged. So
yes.
He wasn't necessarily scenery, but he was an engaged enough character to where he was a part of the storyline. But you didn't necessarily go looking at him like the suspect. When it all kind of clicks, it's actually a solid reveal. Then, like I said, I was like, oh, okay, let me take the wool back over my eyes. Well done.
Nice. Yes, exactly. Jack Shepard was Dysart, who's he's another one of those good stage actors, and I enjoyed him in this quite a bit. And he had the greatest glasses ever. True Coke bottle glasses.
Yes.
They were so funny every time he'd put them on, but I just loved it. Kevin J. O'Connor as Stefano.
Benny
is Kevin J. O'Connor is in like every single what's his name?
Stephen Sommers.
Yes, Stephen Sommers movie. I love Kevin J. O'Connor because you know what you're getting from him, which is going to be something goofy. He's going to play it silly. It's sort of like where you have Stuart Wilson really hamming it up. Kevin J. O'Connor is going to ham it up and be that guy. And I liked him. I liked him here as Stefano, he's like the quartermaster. and he's got all the stuff. And the running gag of he kept wanting Robin's boots.
Sign them over to me. You don't want people fighting over them when you're dead.
Which, what I like about that is the first thing that happens. So, to kind of get off we'll go on a little tangent here. But when Robbins first gets dumped on the island, he's captured by the outsiders. They take him back to their camp, and the first thing they do is the guy with all the face tattoos and the sharpened teeth starts to take his boots. And Merrick stops him. So then, when he gets to the insiders, it's a great joke where Stefano's like, "What? You want to sign a contract over for your boots? You can keep them for now. I don't need them. But when you die, when you inevitably die, then they can come to me."
Yep.
And it's just, it was so good. And I have to mention Don Henderson, who played Killian, who was the brewmaster for the group, because even if you don't recognize the name, and even if you're watching this movie, I'm watching it and I'm like, I know this face. I know who this guy is, but he's a little bit older. He's almost 20 years older than the last time I had seen him in a movie that I could remember, like consciously. And he is the Imperial officer in the first Star Wars movie that gets choked out by Vader during the staff meeting. He's the one that talks back and Vader chokes him. And I was like, that's who that is. And it was so cool to see him. And like, he's been in episodes of Doctor Who. He did Red Dwarf. But this was one of the last things he did. He sadly passed away shortly after this, but what a fun character to play. He's playing him. He's got one arm, which is mentioned. It's never said. It's I kind of like how it's like a thing and you notice it, but it's never brought up. They don't say like, yeah, he lost his arm. They don't give you any exposition about it. He just only has the one arm. He makes the comment that he'll beat the hell out of him with only one arm. But that's it. It's never mentioned again. And I kind of like stuff like that. That's fun, sort of makes it feel like a real world being lived in when something like that happens. We don't need exposition to know that this guy lost his arm for whatever reason. He just doesn't have it.
Right.
And so
it's kind of nice to think about how it might have happened, like to kind of just, I mean, sometimes, that mystery is kind of there just fun, because one of the first things when you see characters like that, obviously they're very striking, but one of the first things obviously is it doesn't have an arm, and then you can't help but to even when they're no longer in the scene or on the screen, it's like, I wonder how that happened, and you kind of play with that a little bit. Sometimes movies like to throw that in.
Yeah, and what I like about it is it's a form of world building that gives your character some sort of an intriguing story without having to tell a story. And it's done through he only has the one arm or some sort of costume, like the guy that I mentioned that tries to take Robin's boots right away. He's got tattoos all over his face. His teeth are sharpened to points. Was this a thing that happened to him pre going to prison or in prison? Did it not happen until he got on the island? How long has he been on the island? Because he's obviously pretty high strung. And according to Merrick, the average life expectancy on the island is only 6 months. So how long has this dude been here?
Yeah.
Like,
we don't know. Merrick's been there 7 years.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of fun stuff there, but it's such a great just mix of fun character actors in these scenes, and they're playing out all the tropes. And the movie is very tropey, and it's the kind of thing that we have seen before, but it does bring some of its own twists and its own flavor to things.
Yes.
Ray Liotta, he's stuck on the island. He wants off the island. And he doesn't give a reason till like the last act why he's so intent on getting off the island. We don't know his backstory, any of that. We've come to find out that, he definitely, he had to run a mission while he was in the army in Lebanon and Beirut, right? I think.
If memory serves,
yeah,
I think so.
But he ran a mission where they killed an entire village, probably on bad intelligence, but it was women and children. He felt bad about it. They covered it up, so he killed his commanding officer. Like, he has no remorse over the killing of his commanding officer, but he's suffering from the PTSD of all these innocent people that he killed just by following orders. And so he won't follow any orders. Any order anybody gives him in this movie, he like goes against.
Right.
He
He
also
loves to shun authority, and that's
Yes.
what kind of makes the character so great.
yeah. He also spends a lot of the movie staring past the camera and breathing heavily. I noticed that. Like,
Yes.
especially the first third of the movie is a lot of, and I like to call those the when it's staring past the camera like that. It's that Steven Spielberg shot, because Spielberg
Yes.
always has shots of somebody looking past camera and reacting to something behind that. And like he did that a lot, but it was also with just very heavy breathing because he just got done sprinting for his life.
Right.
And I mentioned how the movie kind of had a thing where you don't really understand exactly how much time has passed, because early on in the movie he gets injured to the point where he can't walk. Which, by the way, switched legs. I don't know if you noticed that. If you've ever noticed that.
I did not.
The first time when he gets his leg cut and he grabs, like, rips off part of his shirt to tie it off, it's his right leg. But later on, his left leg is the one that's injured and has the wound on it. It was weird. I'm like, did I whatever. Because he also got hit with like an arrow in that leg too. So I don't know. Maybe it was.
Yes.
He got beat up.
He got
pretty bad.
better.
But
Did, yes.
But you don't have a sense of like how long did it take him to heal from that, and he's there for a good amount of time because he's there long enough to get to know all of these people
Right.
fairly well. So it would have been nice to have just a little bit of a sense of like time, but at the same time, you don't really need it because the story is very simple. It's just like they want to, and he wants to get off the island. Merrick wants control of the entire island. Lerner has control of the entire island and wants to keep everything quiet about what's on there. So we just keep cutting back to him, like looking at monitors of heat maps and things, hoping that nobody can find out what's going on. And the insiders just want to live their life. They're just all kind of convict hippies, making moonshine and weaving their own clothes.
Because that's what you do.
Yep. But then I like where they throw in the subplot of they're trying to figure out a way to get off the island with sort of almost like a stealth boat, and it keeps failing. And at first they can't quite figure out why it's failing, but they just know something's not right. And then that's when you learn that King is like, he's a double agent and he's relaying information.
It's a plan.
Yeah. Which did lead to the saddest moment of the movie, which is I love the trope of like, we have a thing, but we're missing the one part. And the hero of the movie happened to see that one part early in the movie.
Just so happens. Yes.
What's great is watching it the second time, because the first time I'm like, oh yeah, he did see that thing. Watching it the second time, I'm like, they're spending a lot of time showing him pick up that distributor and like look at it and then put it back down.
Yes.
And he touches basically nothing
later.
else. It's like, ooh, foreshadow. But yeah, they've got this V8 engine they're going to put in a boat, but he doesn't have a distributor cap. And Leota's like, I saw one of those. I can go get it for you. And they're
Funny
like,
you should mention that.
Yeah. So it's
Distributor cap ex machina.
Exactly. And it gives him the reason to go back to Merrick's camp, which also gives us a reason to still have Merrick's camp around. Like, because there's a long stretch of the movie where you sort of forget about them. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. The outsiders are still a thing, and they're like dangerous.
Yes.
So yeah, and I love where he goes back and he gets that, and like, now here's the thing with this movie. Here's what makes this movie work. We've talked about the cast, and the cast is great.
Absolutely.
The story, fine, nothing wrong with it at all. I'm a sucker for this type of movie. So I love Escape from New York. I even like Escape from L.A. Fortress is super fun. Fortress is this movie, but it's all set in that level 6 maximum security prison, right? That's Fortress. And this is like, well, what if Fortress was on an island? Okay, we'll go with that. But I'm a sucker for those kinds of movies because you can just turn your brain off and enjoy the spectacle that they are. But what makes them work is to have a director that knows how to do things visually. And Martin Campbell can do that.
Absolutely.
And Martin Campbell has a little bit of an up and down track record with how good his movies are.
Green Lantern. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say that out loud?
Well,
Green Lantern. Sorry.
So, and it's funny because like, this is a guy who is responsible for 2 of my favorite James Bond films, hands down, and
Sure,
twice kind of reinvigorating that franchise with GoldenEye and Casino Royale. Those are both great.
Absolutely.
He also directed not only the movie, but the original TV series in England of Edge of Darkness, which is really good.
Like Edge of Darkness. I had never seen the TV series. I had heard that it was from that, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that movie is it's well done, absolutely well done, and very heartbreaking.
Yes. Yeah, so it was a 6-episode miniseries that he did back in the mid-'80s. But like, he kind of got his start with sort of TV miniseries and TV stuff and moved into movies. But then he gets into movies and he makes this, and the very next year is GoldenEye. He makes The Mask of Zorro. Vertical Limits, kind of okay. But then he comes back with, a few years later, it's Legend of Zorro. And then Casino Royale. Green Lantern's not great. All right.
No, and it made me sad.
I don't know how much of it is fully his fault. He's at fault because he directed it, but I'm sure there was some sort of like DC wanted certain things there. But what I will say is that outside of the going fully CG for the Green Lantern costume, that just it wasn't quite there to do what the look they were going for. Visually, the movie's not awful in terms of action sequences. Because if there's one thing that Martin Campbell can do, it is direct action. And direct action
Absolutely.
on set with practical effects. Because GoldenEye has some great action set pieces. This movie has some amazing action set. The whole fight that takes place, the action scene where the outsiders show up and raid the camp, because it happens twice. Both of those look so good. One at night and one during the day. And I love when a movie does that because I don't want all my action sequences to look, you don't want them all to look the same. So have one at night, you can hide a few things, you can do a little bit more, and then you do this one during the day, and they pulled out all the stops. Like those explosions.
Oh yeah.
Whoo boy. And normally it's they should have been using that gasoline-based paint on everything. But here, they literally had a character whose whole job it was to make jet fuel for them to drink. And so they just put that all over the camp and blew it up. And it looked so good. All of Martin Campbell, when he's doing stuff in camera, it looks so good. And he does a great job too.
Absolutely.
Of staging everything so that you kind of know what's going on. You don't get lost in the action.
He's very good with the geography in action, and he knows how to set up a camera. And worked with Terry Rawlings on this, and he also did with GoldenEye. And that man also in the editing room, he's just able to really piece together action that flows so well. He has geography down as far as because it's never something blows up here. Wait, that guy wasn't there. He's so great. And when I saw with Lantern, it was kind of one of those things where, okay, I'm hoping, and I saw it and I didn't hate it. I didn't think it was terrible, but I didn't think it was great. And it was kind of one of those, it's like, but it's his name. You still have that correlation, knowing what this guy's body of work has been to this point. You still have that moment of, he's fantastic. He's still making movies, and he's phenomenal.
And Green Lantern, so here's my quick backstory of Green Lantern. So I watched the movie. I knew Ryan Reynolds was in it. That was it. I'm just like, Green Lantern. All right. I turn it on. I start watching it. I didn't see it in theaters. When it ended, and it said, because there weren't opening credits that I remember. So they didn't have a directed by opening credit. So when it ended, and it said directed by Martin Campbell, and I was like, really? But he's good.
Yes.
He makes good. What happened? Like, how did this happen? Because by this point in my life, I knew who Martin Campbell was, and it blew my mind because I'm like, but he made Casino Royale like not that long ago. It was just so weird. But oh man, it's those directors that can do a certain thing. Like, say what you want about man, names just are going right out of my brain tonight. Transformers,
Michael Bay.
Michael Bay.
Bayham.
I need, I think, more caffeine is the problem.
Amen. Always.
But say what you want about Michael Bay. When it comes to making action look good and dynamic, he can capture your eye. Now, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. He gets a little over-reliant on it, but he's very good at that. And Martin Campbell is very good at that. The geography of the action is always important to me. I remember seeing, I think it was I want to say it was Clash of the Titans, the remake. Clash of the Titans. And one of my problems with it was there were action scenes where I got completely lost. I'm like, wait, who's where and what's happening now? And didn't this start out in the daylight, but now it's nighttime? Like, did this action scene take 5 hours? And like, I never feel that with a Martin Campbell directed action sequence when I'm watching this. GoldenEye. GoldenEye, I love. And not only that, but great stunts too. He seems to like having stunts with people falling, like great distances. Because
that waterfall fall in No Escape is fantastic.
Oh, it
with
looks
Ray
so
Liotta.
good. Mm-hmm. It looked really, really
And that
good.
was actually done with a pulley system that they kind of rigged up. They thought about the shot and storyboarded, of course, but it was one of those things where how they actually ended up doing it was so the Steadicam operator is being lowered at the same time as the free fall. And I've seen like first look and stuff like that, so I've seen what it looked like. And there's this part of me that goes, hey, what NASA scientist did you get to go, if the Steadicam operator is falling at this speed and terminal velocity is roughly 120-ish miles an hour? And it looks fantastic because there's that scene where he's falling and the camera, and there's a quick cut, so it's a little bit of a bummer. He's falling and the camera turns and then you still see like, oh, he's still got more falling to do.
Yeah.
And it looks fantastic. And there's like I said, there's a little bit of a quick cut to, I want to say a further back shot, but it is one of those things where, only certain directors, and this was 94. This is before we started having really, not just CGI, but having the level of computer technology where the computers were kind of running the cameras. Obviously directing and storyboarding was still important, but you didn't have it yet where you were going to have this computer rig do this. You still had to do a lot of things man-made, and you had to get a guy crazy enough, somewhere in Queensland, like, all right, mate, I'll sit in the Steadicam and follow it down.
Right, and that is a thing that that you don't think about with action sequencing. Is it's not just the stunt crew that has to be a part of that, but when you're doing something that dynamic of a shot, that camera crew's got to be part of it too. Which is
Absolutely.
I will occasionally kind of give James Cameron a little guff just for like not writing the most intelligent stories, but I will never doubt his ability to make a visually engaging film. And he is also not afraid to grab the camera and get right in there and be the cameraman either. And a lot of respect for that, because I feel like directors get a lot of respect, cinematographers do, but cameramen don't always. They're unsung. You never hear about them. And I think of shots like in the Bourne Ultimatum, where they were steady camming it, and you had to have Matt Damon and or his stunt double jump that alley from one window to the other,
Yes.
but you had to have the
And it's like-
cameraman doing that right behind him with the camera rig on. So
Absolutely. Shots like that I love.
and that was that free fall in this. And then a year later, Martin Campbell sets up and does that great stunt on the dam at the beginning of GoldenEye with the guy, not in a free fall the same way, but he is, because he's bungee jumping. And it's such an amazing, that is a stunt for me that is burned into my memory because I saw that in theaters. And so sitting there watching that stunt happen in a theater at that time was just amazing. And so now to watch this and see he did a very similar stunt the year before in another movie, it's like, all right, this guy knows what he's doing. Like, and it's such a cool looking thing. And there's so many of those in this. It's a lot of fun. This movie, what it is it's fun. It's sad that it didn't do well at the box office at all. It was a bomb.
It barely made back its budget.
It barely made back its budget, and its budget was $20 million. It was not a big budget film. It sets itself up for, okay, immediately at a $20 million budget, Stallone and Schwarzenegger are out. You're not going to get them anyway. Right. But I think, I wonder if in the marketing, having Ray Liotta as your lead at the time hurt it, because nowadays more audience members are willing to give an actor a chance if they haven't seen him do an action film necessarily.
Right.
But I feel like at that time, maybe we were like, Ray Liotta, wait, what? It's sort of like, think of the Batman and Robert Pattinson, and so many people only think of him as, you know, Twilight, but they were willing to give it a chance, and
Yes.
he's amazing in the Batman, right?
Absolutely.
And I feel like Liotta, there were probably too many people that were like, the dude from Goodfellas, he's going to be an action movie? Like, what is this? But it works, and he's good in it. And I just think that maybe that hurt the movie at the time. And sort of those.
See that with the case. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, you go.
I could see that a little bit, not just because he was. So he had a string of movies just after this, or after Goodfellas, I should say, and it was one of those cases of, okay, he got discovered because he was in Something Wild from Jonathan Demme right before he was in Goodfellas, and he started having kind of a string of movies. He did right after this, he did a movie that I love, and I think it did fine in the box office, but it's a wonderful little gem called Unlawful Entry, with Kurt Russell, Madeline Stowe, and him. And it's basically this cop that stalks and terrorizes this couple that he's become obsessed with, especially the wife. And, you know, like most actors, when they strike fire, you know, they take as many roles as they can. They capitalize on it, which they should. But certainly in the case here, don't think he had entirely got to that point yet where he was solidified as like, okay, he's an A-lister, or whenever he might have been cast, it wasn't necessarily like people were going to go out to see just a Ray Liotta movie.
Yeah.
And I think that might have, I don't want to say hurt it, because I think he's great in it. I just hate the fact that so many people missed out on it.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because he was very busy through the 90s and into the early 2000s, but he wasn't quite the draw that he became in the mid 2000s and then the 2010s. Because you look at some of the stuff he did, like Turbulence, but Copland, I love Copland, and he's great in Copland.
Oh, yes.
And then you see him kind of popping it up in things like Hannibal and Heartbreakers before Narc. Narc is another one, underrated. If you haven't seen that.
Amazing. Oh, my God.
I love
You
Narc.
had to mention Narc. It's wonderful. And and if you wanted to do like a highlight reel and like memoriam to Ray Liotta, who I was always a fan of, and I actually got weepy when I heard that he died. He was one of those that I'm not necessarily saying he was exactly like this character, but he reminded me kind of like George Kennedy, where you know every time you see him, he's gonna add something, and he's gonna be. And I hate to call Ray Liotta a character actor because he was so much more than that. But it was kind of like George Kennedy, where like you knew he was a great mainstay. He wasn't going to be somebody who just was like there for the camera. He was always going to be entertaining and involved in the character, and just somebody you know you wanted to go see. You didn't necessarily go, oh, the new Ray Liotta movie was out, but knowing he was in it helped kind of bring that about.
Yeah, and that's where I feel as though he was a little underrated in that way, because he wasn't, you know, oh, here's a new Denzel Washington movie, or here's, you know, this. But he always brought something, and he made movies he was in. He elevated them to something that they were better than they should have been. I also think this is a type of movie that we don't get enough of anymore, which is the mid-budget action movies. These days, an action movie is either going to be crazy over the top budget, or it's going to be something really low budget schlocky.
Yes.
And you don't get like this fits right in the middle of that at the time in 1994, a $20 million film, because we hadn't what was Waterworld 95, I think, and that was like $100 million. Yeah, and that was $100 million budget, and that was huge. That was a big thing. And this isn't your like, they don't, because obviously they had money. The way that the effects and the look of everything was, it doesn't look cheap. But I feel like that's a kind of a lost film. Nowadays, if it's an action film, it's going to be one or the other. They're going to go super low budget and kind of play it tongue in cheek, or they're going to go really high budget and blow everything out. And even if it's a Netflix original or something like that. And I kind of miss the mid-budget ones a little bit, because that mid-budget type of, like, Hot Fuzz is that same thing, right? It's sort of a mid-budget action film. That's kind of the last one I can really think of that ilk, where it's not over the, it is over the top, it is silly, but it's also kind of a high concept thing. It's a little sci-fi. And I think some of that was, you know, you mentioned Eraser, and it's like that was kind of the last of the Arnold movies, even though he kept doing stuff up through like End of Days and things. But by that point, they were almost self-parody.
Yes.
And I just miss this type of movie where we're going to take especially the sci-fi angle of it. We're going to take kind of a high concept sci-fi thing, give it a decent enough budget to look good, put some great character actors in there so that you believe in all these characters, and just have fun with it. But it doesn't have to be a satire or what was the one with Ben Stiller and Jack Black, Thunder?
Tropic Thunder.
Yeah, Tropic Thunder. Like Tropic Thunder can be that, but it's also meant to be a satire of these kinds of movies. And I just sort of miss like the straightforward, we're just going to do this and it's going to be silly and we're going to have fun with it. But they kind of got relegated to direct to video, I think is what ended up happening.
They did. And especially when, you know, because there was a time, and I'm so glad this movie got a theatrical release, even though people missed it. There was a time where, you know, because everything now is available through streaming. And I remember far enough back to where if you were somebody like John Travolta, who had a movie called The Professionals with Ari Gross, and he, you know, Travolta was still Travolta, but it was one of those things where your career was pretty much done and over with if you had something that was like, it had your face on the cassette cover. You knew it wasn't in the theater. And it was kind of one of those, you know, at the time, it wasn't necessarily considered legit, I guess you could say, for certain actors, because it had kind of told people where their career had gone. And, you know, now everything's streaming. And I think that's why, especially movies like this would turn into self-parody. And I think a lot of it's because it's like, if you like this, you're going to like this. And one thing that's great about this movie, particularly No Escape, is that in so many ways, yes, it connects to other science fiction movies, and it was produced by Gail Ann Hurd, and you know her credentials are stellar. But it is kind of one of those things where, yeah, you're not going to see a ton of these like this anymore. And I think one thing that's great about this movie, Mad Max, kind of that mid-budget, even Hot Fuzz, is they knew how to use what was around them. Like the people who photographed this stuff really understood not just where to place the camera, but like what they were surrounded by. Because I think this has a little bit of connectivity, a little harken to Mad Max, because you have here this island, and you know how to photograph it, and if you know how to kind of what the set should be, and really know how to take in what's around them. Same thing with Mad Max, because you literally have a desert. It's photographed in such a way where it feels not only so foreboding, but of course endless. And I think that's one thing that's definitely missed now with even trying to do something that would be a mid-budget action movie. Because when they're big budget nowadays, not only do they blow everything up, you don't even connect to the surroundings or the actors, because a lot of it is now green screen and tennis balls.
Yeah, that's true as well. I just miss these kinds of movies. And thank you for bringing up Gail Ann Hurd, because the one thing the movie doesn't have at all is there's not a single woman in the movie. I get it from the sense of it's a prison. So I sort of understand that. And if they were going to do it, it would end up being some kind of a token thing, and it would have been really bad. But there's not a single woman in the entirety of this film. But it's produced by Gail Ann Hurd, and one of the better producers out there. I mean, she just produces some amazing stuff right up through under the, you know, she's still producing Walking Dead. But just great. And so I'm glad you brought her name up, because
she's fantastic.
You know, she's responsible for helping produce things like Aliens. What were some of the, I mean, during this era, It was The Terminator and Aliens. Those were a couple of her first films she produced. Before going on, she was involved with James Cameron for a few years with The Abyss.
She was married to him, actually.
Well, yeah, she was. Terminator 2, but like she keeps going on, and it's just amazing stuff that she did. So thank you for bringing her up.
Yeah, she's always been phenomenal, and she's one of those producers. I mean, of course, there's many producers we know throughout the movie business. I've always felt like she was one of those that really kind of not just got fandoms, but also kind of knew how to kind of work around a lot of this stuff. Because, you know, as a producer, a lot of it is problem solving, but also knowing what the goal is. And I've always believed, you know, so many things she's made, and like many producers, they don't always become home runs, but so many of the stuff she does is really like she knows where she's trying to get to, and she knows the audience.
Yeah, and she gets people that fit to the movie that's being made. I just watched recently for fun Punisher Warzone, which a lot of people either don't remember existed or kind of it got heavily panned by the critics. But I feel like it's a good movie for what it is because it didn't try to be anything more than it was. And Gail Ann Hurd was involved in that, just like she was involved in, Aeon Flux and The Punisher and Hulk and like all the Clock Stoppers is another one. She knows the movie she's trying to make, and she gets people involved in those movies that know what they're trying to do. And so I very much appreciate that. And another thing that a movie like this gives us that I always appreciate is wonderful sound clips, because there's so many good things in a cheeseball 90s action movie like this that is just great. And I have some stuff I want to play. I got some stuff I got to play for you because, like I mentioned how Ray Liotta's character, he plays him so just straightforward and just like angry. And one of the first things he says is when Michael Lerner is talking to him and turns around and walks away, and then turns back around and he says, "Do you have anything else you want to say?" And he just looks at him dead in the eyes. And it's that Ray Liotta stare and just says,
Was there anything you wanted to add?
To never turn your back on me again.
It's like, I'm not going to. And if you're in a room, I'm going to back out of that room. I will make sure I always have eye contact. I always have a sight line on you.
Have my danger whistle, like, yeah. Just to have that line in a maximum security prison, like that's confidence. Like, I've never seen your manhood, but you must truck it around in a wheelbarrow. Like, how great.
Yeah.
And what's great too is he plays that line so straight. And he's in this max prison surrounded by these guards who are armed to the tonsils. And it's like he not only gets away with the line, even though he does go to the island, but he gets away with the line in the sense of, wow, he meant that. Like, literally, it was one of those things where it was like, yeah, I'm not going to mess with this guy.
Yeah, and the warden immediately, like, recognizes that, too, which I thought was pretty funny.
Yeah.
I like this exchange between him and Casey, Kevin Dillon's character.
Most of these cons can't even read.
I can.
What, fly a chopper?
No, read.
And another thing that Liotta does really well, and there's the gif that it's a gif from Goodfellas where he just bursts out laughing. He's got a great way of having those short bursts of like a ton of energy in what he's doing without it being angry acting. And so when Merrick is offering him the position, the job with the group, and he just says,
Promise to hire another lifeguard.
and that made me laugh so much. I don't remember what this one was. It's called Lucky. Let's see what this is.
You're lucky you can't do it.
That's right.
Oh, yes.
That was a good moment because at this point, Robbins knows that Casey doesn't belong with these cons and with these criminals.
Right.
And Casey just wants to help. And he's like, I got to kill a bunch of people while I do this. You haven't done that before. Yeah. You're lucky you can't do it. And that's that unfolding. We still don't know his full backstory yet. The backstory of Robbins. We haven't heard, but that gives us a little more insight into him. And that's the kind of thing that, again, Liotta was really good at doing that.
Yes.
Most of the rest of them are Merrick, honestly. I could have captured just everything that dude said. Because it was so great. Like, so this one's called 7 Years.
That really isn't necessary. I mean, the average life expectancy here is, what, 6 months?
I've been here 7 years.
And it's that change in his face. And he's like, he's proud of that fact, but he's got that wry smile.
It's a badge of honor.
Oh, so good. What's funny is that he's meant to be like really intimidating, and yet Robbins just wipes the floor with him anytime they fight. Like, it's not even a contest. But I loved it anyway. Let's see. Oh, I love the way he says this.
Our director of aquatic activities.
Aquatic activities. Once again,
that was always just a jolting moment. That it's like you look like you've got you look like you've got a string of priors that would print out on a dot matrix printer and just destroy it, because it was the 90s. And then he talks and it's like, so the first lesson on quantum energy is, and it was jarring, but this was also one of those moments, and I don't even think we get good villains, necessarily characters like that anymore, to where they're engaging to look at, and then they throw you curveballs and you get more engaged. And it's always dicey, like on set. Obviously Martin Campbell did a great job with the casting, but I'm kind of wondering if some people were looking on set at the time going,
oh yeah, they had to have been like,
yeah.
And the Mad Max comparisons can continue because it's kind of like the Lord Humongous, where here's this giant bodybuilder in the hockey mask and like leather briefs, and then he grabs the microphone and starts talking, and he's articulate, and you're like, whoa, wait a second, something here doesn't add up.
He's scary, and then it's like, where did you go to finishing school?
Yeah, exactly. I mentioned this one earlier, but this was Be in Charge.
I really want to be in charge.
It's like
been under a lot of stress.
He's so earnest about it too. Yeah.
I've been under a lot of stress lately.
Like, it shouldn't be intimidating, but it's the mixture of that voice coming out of the dude with dreads down to his, his shoulder blades that
so much unexpectedness, and I think that's why that kind of, it really feels between the voice and the delivery and the look, like it feels so square peg round hole. And then because it is just so unexpected, I think it just lends to the concept of this guy is volatile in a way that even he may not necessarily know how to bend his head around. Like, you don't know where he's coming from. Maybe he doesn't either. Just give him a wide berth when he walks down the street. Just let him go.
Yeah. Let's see. This one was...
That's extraordinary. It's not exactly what we had in mind, but extraordinary.
I loved that.
Oh, so great.
I got a couple more here. I always am a sucker for when you get a character who will do some sort of a welcome, or the trope of doing like welcome and or hello in multiple languages. Like I love in The World's End, where Simon Pegg's character's sitting on the couch. He's man-spreading, and he's just, bienvenue, welcome. And
welcome.
Stuart Wilson does it here. And now that I've seen this movie, I feel like they wrote that into The World's End as an homage to this film.
Bonjour, guten Tag, welcome.
And the way he says welcome, so good. I'm
very
also
Karloff, very Lugosi. Welcome.
Oh, man, Karloff, that's perfect. I'm a sucker for that, and I'm a even bigger sucker for fake laughter and like those forced laughs. And if this isn't one of the best, like this is a Nick Cage level forced fake laugh, and it's after he cut the guy's head off. Because we haven't seen. So at this point, we haven't seen the Outsiders for a little while, and we cut back to them like, hey, don't forget these guys still exist. And the guy with all the facial tattoos that we mentioned earlier talks back, and so you get the trope of like starting to walk away and then turn around and attack him, and he cuts his head off. And after the head falls off, you just get that might be my new favorite fake laugh. It's
It's a good
just
ringtone.
oh, it's so yes, like I'm sitting there and I get a new text message and it's just so that's going on my soundboard. I'm gonna have that
Oh,
now.
that's
So
awesome.
when something
That would
crazy
be a great
happens,
ringtone.
oh, it's so good. Just
Walk through a Lego store and just that goes off. Yeah.
and then finally, this one, I couldn't help but capture this because it's this clip. The thing that makes it the best is the very end of it.
And what do? You turn around and you made a fucking horse's ass out of me. I hate it when that happens.
That shouldn't work. I shouldn't laugh at that, but it's so good because the delivery. I hate it when that happens.
Yep.
I
It's
love
just so
it.
great. Yeah.
So
There should have been a prequel movie of
yes,
Merrick.
Merrick. I want the story of Merrick.
'Cause he's one of the biggest ones, like you were saying that, there's little here's and there's little breadcrumbs about, well, this is how this person ended up here, and they kind of touch on some of this stuff. As far as like an out and out void, and that's probably another just piece, that ambiguity, that piece of that character where you don't know where he's coming from, and just that kind of nervousness, that volatility, just looking at him because you don't know what could happen, but then you're kind of like, where did that turn? Like,
Yeah.
where did that go wrong?
What happened? Who hurt you? I need to know.
Yes.
Like, and I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of a characterization or a character where I want to know more. And there's a big difference between I want to know more and they don't give us enough. Like, there's oftentimes characters where you're just like, I don't know enough about that character to care. And in this, yeah, I don't know anything about Merrick other than he's insane and he's very well spoken and he will do whatever because he wants to be in charge. But you want to know more. Yeah. Like, you want to hear the back. Like, okay, I fully understand why he is here, but how did he get here? What happened to bring him here?
Yes.
So yeah, I love that. This movie is just, it's fun. It's a silly, park your brain at the door, mid-90s action movie. You're going to get great looking stunt work, a story that sort of makes sense, but doesn't really matter. And your bad guys get their comeuppance. It is violent, I will say that.
Right.
But it's worth it. I think if you are a fan of especially sci-fi action, check this one out. If you like movies with Christopher Lambert, or which, I mean, this could have easily been Christopher Lambert in this movie. I could have seen that. That could have worked, actually. But like that, just that kind of movie, those mid-budget, it's not the super low budget like Cyborg with Jean-Claude Van Damme. But
Cyborg.
It's sort of Van Damme. Like, I understand why they would have offered this to Van Damme, because this feels right in his wheelhouse with that sort of hard target, sudden death, like that era of movie that we just don't see as much anymore, or at least not as well known. They're out there, I'm sure, but there's something about this, like the not straight to video versions, because straight to video, once you hit sort of mid-90s and into like the early 2010s, that straight to video, then straight to streaming, for a long time was that death mark. It was
a junkyard for some. It was like, here you go. Like,
and you would get a lot of not even B-list movie actors, but sort of like stuntmen that could talk and enough to put them in front of the camera, but maybe they weren't quite good enough. The thing with a movie like this is the level of acting from Ray Liotta and Lance Henriksen and Ian McNeice and Ernie Hudson elevates it to something that's more watchable.
Absolutely.
So I definitely think it's worth it. And thank you for bringing it to me, because
my pleasure. Yeah.
Super fun. It's going in my.
This is a gem of mine. It's one of those that knowing so many people, and thank you so much for having me on. And especially talking about this movie that I've always been jaded about. And, I bring it to a lot of people's attention. and either they never heard of it or they might have heard bits and pieces of it. And one funny fact we talked about a little bit was this actually had a couple of home video games. They had a Sega Genesis game and a Super NES game for this movie. And it was like, wait, huh? Is this like the ET thing again with the game? And this is one of those movies that's just a wonderful little gem that I kind of keep close to my heart. I remember watching it in the theater. I think I saw it 3 times with some friends of mine when I was growing up and stuff. And because growing up in Hawaii, such a great outlet to kind of not necessarily the outside world. It's not like, we didn't have technology, but being on an island, like certain things just don't click the same way when you live in other parts of the world.
Sure.
So this was one of those movies that really was like, oh, this is, this is something that's kind of out there. And I think in many ways it's one of those that when I was growing up, it kind of made me more interested in cinema in its own way, because my father was a huge fan of. There was a time during the 70s and 80s where there was a lot of knockoffs of Mad Max, and there was this huge string of these movies that, because this was during the Cold War and there was all this back and forth between the USSR and America, so there was a string of these type of movies that were knockoffs of Mad Max, and then they knocked off each other in a weird way. And there was just a slew of them. And I think what kind of attracted me to this movie in the first place is that it reminded me a little bit of that, because he would rent a ton of them. And in so many ways, outside of like the first Terminator and stuff, so many of them were like the same. I felt like I was watching the same movie over and over again. And they would have like, Fred Williamson and all these soap opera actors. This is kind of what drew me to this. And then seeing it in the theater, it was like, oh, this is better than that.
This is that, but better. It's this. You know what this reminds me of is one of my favorite movies, and my all-time favorite buddy cop movie is Running Scared with Billy Crystal and Gregory Hines.
Peter Hyams movie.
Peter Hyams directed. I absolutely adore that. I quote it like pretty much daily. It is easily one of my 10 favorite films I've ever seen in my lifetime.
It's fantastic.
And for the longest time, I felt like I was the only person that had ever seen that movie, because I would mention it and people were like, what? Like they'd never heard of it. And it's slowly garnered more and more of a fan base over the years. And at least now I know other people that have seen it. That's what this one feels like to me. It's hard to call it a hidden gem, but it is kind of a hidden gem. But it's like it's underseen. More people just need to see the movie. Will it be revered as one of the better 90s action films? No, it's not. It's just not going to be that. But if more people see it, it'll get appreciated. It's got that cult classic. It's got all the elements to be a cult classic, and it feels like it bombed at the box office and got forgotten for about 20 years, and now it's starting to get its momentum. People are starting to figure out what it is.
And it's just a good time. That's what makes it so great. It's it's got great messages here and there, but they're kind of smattered about. But ultimately, it's just a good time.
It is. It's just a fun time. Definitely check it out. It's totally worth it. Theo, thank you so much for bringing this to me.
Absolutely.
And for coming on the show. This is a great discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Now you are part of the Part-Time Gamers, correct?
Correct. Yes, I've actually got that in a little bit, and then I also do on Swellcast. You can find me under Mr. Bingo, and that's literally me just talking to myself for 5 minutes.
Perfect. Excellent. Swellcast and the Part-Time Gamers. If you want more Theo, you can find him there. Mr. Bingo on the Swellcast. I love it. Excellent. And we got to get you out of here because you got Part-Time Gamers coming up. So Sean will yell at me if I'm not. I promised him you would be done in time. So
yes, I'm cheating on him. It's OPP, other people's podcasts. So,
but thank you so much for being here. We'll definitely got to get you back. We'll find next time.
Absolutely.
Next time, I'm showing you something new. All right, we're gonna find something you haven't seen, and we'll do that. Next week, I have I've got a good one coming next week. I know, I just can't remember what it is because, well, it's been that type of week for me. I've been very, very busy.
Amen.
I am going to watch for the first time Mulholland Drive. I have been in a kick the past year of wanting to watch more David Lynch. So Mulholland Drive is coming up next week, and I'm looking forward to it. My last
Joy.
my last David Lynch film was Blue Velvet, and I liked it a lot more than I thought I was going to. Like I
It's
did
my
not.
favorite Lynch movie.
Yeah,
It's something that's really just
so
so well done.
Yeah, so this should be pretty fun. So Mulholland Drive next week. Now this show typically records on Sunday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, twitch.tv/TV's Travis. You can come hang out there. We recorded a little bit earlier tonight, but every week we do that. Comes out as a podcast on Wednesdays, anywhere you get your podcasts. Ratings and reviews are always welcome, of course. You can go to tvstravis.com to find this show or any other shows that I work on. And you can also, if you want to financially support this show, there is a Patreon, patreon.com/WYHS. And that is as little as $1 per episode. You get episodes earlier. And I'm also working on a monthly movie catch-up. And what that is going back through the back catalog of this show and picking movies that people haven't seen yet and watching them together, do a little movie watch along. So that's part of the Patreon at certain levels, but definitely check that out if you can. And just listening to the show and being a part of the audience is so wonderful. Thank you all for all of that. So Theo, thank you. And
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, until next week and Mulholland Drive, which I can't wait for. Remember to enjoy your movies. And let's be excellent to each other. This has been Wait You Haven't Seen.
Amen.
Now that's funny!